quite often in debates in this House when we're talking about the title, a number of innovative members get to their feet and give well-considered or poorly considered, actually, alternatives of names. And I want to commend the member, although I think it was entire nonsense, frankly, that he spoke. I think he said it very eloquently, and I didn't agree with a single word of it. But there are... Sorry? That's excellent, excellent. And to be honest, Mr Biscown, Labour learns a lot from you. Actually, Mr Chairman, the act of a bill, the title of a bill is meant to represent, so that the purpose of the bill, so that members of the public can read it and say, well, actually, now I know what this is about. And I think they'd have quite a lot of confusion if they read the title of this bill. The first problem with it is the one that was identified briefly in his contribution by my colleague Brendan Burns, the Member of Parliament for Christchurch Central, which is actually where the head office of this organisation is based, in Christchurch Central, because he alerted the House to the fact that Environment Canterbury, which is the name that is in the Act, is actually the trading name of the organisation rather than the legal title. Now, it does explain that, and I'll just diverse momentarily from the strict debate on the title, having been given that leadership from Mr Boscawen. It does explain that later on in Part 1, Clause 4 in the interpretation, where it says that Environment Canterbury, or ECAN, means the Canterbury Regional Council. But actually, if you're looking strictly at the title, I think it's quite sloppy, and I think that Mr Hyde, of all ministers, is probably not very tolerant of sloppiness, actually. I mean, I'm sure not all ministers are as lacking in tolerance of sloppiness as he may be, but I would think that he would have preferred, had he been responsible for this legislation, rather than Dr the Honourable Nick Smith, to say this is a legal entity we're talking about. We're talking about actually taking away the elected representatives of the legal entity that is responsible for the statutory management of air, of natural resources, of water quality, of water management, of passenger transport, of biodiversity, a huge range of statutory functions that the Canterbury Regional Council has. So why don't we use its proper name in the title? It seems to be such a basic point that if you're talking about gutting an organisation, taking away the democratic right to vote of every single Canterbury citizen, our democratic right to vote for our regional councillors, the least the minister could have done is given that organisation the respect of referring to it in the title of this legislation by its proper legal name. It is not Environment Canterbury. It is called the Canterbury Regional Council. We all call it ECAN, actually. So they could just as sloppily have referred to it as ECAN. So that's the first message that I'd like to give to the House, Mr Chairman. I think it's disrespectful. I think it shows a sign of sloppiness in the preparation of the legislation, and I think it shows a lack of attention to detail and rigour on the part of the Minister, none of which are attributes that I think this House would want to commend. The second point that I want to make is referring to the words that are in brackets, and I want to just refer to the first two to start with, and that is temporary commissioners. It's been very clear during this debate that there is nothing temporary about the role of commissioners taking up the responsibility as an alternative to our elected representatives. My colleague Leanne Dalzell referred to the regulatory impact statement, which had a strong indication that this is just the first step. This is the first step towards the total abolition of Environment Canterbury, the total abolition of our regional council, and either the maintenance of commissioners performing those statutory roles, which would be a total disaster for us, or the Minister who's in the chair at the moment, his dream come true, just the abolition of the Regional Council and the amalgamation of its functions into the city councils and district councils in the area. So I think that it's quite misrepresentative of the actual facts behind this debate, calling it a temporary commissioners. In the legislation they say that they'll go till a job's finished, Mr Chairman.
Honourable Ruth Dyson.
It's actually really hard to work out from the rest of the legislation what one would define as the job. So they are temporary because in the law there's a provision that says that we should have elections by 2013, but there's nothing at all to stop the Minister coming into this House in the same way that he did yesterday, saying, I've had enough of Environment Canterbury, I'm going to get rid of all the elected councillors. Actually, I'm going to appoint 7 commissioners, one of whom I'm going to give the House the courtesy of naming. We only know the name of 1/7 of the controlling body of our new organisation, the temporary commissioners. We only know the name of one of them, and yet this bill is about to pass into the law. And then he said, but, you know, in 3.5 years' time, I'll be generous enough to let you have a vote again. Well, thanks for nothing, actually, Minister Smith. We want our vote this year. We want the right to vote for our regional authority this year. So implying that they're temporary gives us no confidence at all, because we don't have any faith or trust in the Minister that this is not the start of the demise of the Regional Council. We have no confidence at all that the assurances that are alluded to in this legislation, that we will get a vote in 3 years' time, is going to come true. And even if it was, there is no justification at all for this law being put into place. The final point that I want to make, Mr Chairman, is in relation to the last part of the words in the bracket, in the title, which is the Environment Canterbury brackets temporary commissioners and improved water management, close brackets. Dr Smith and I had an interchange earlier on in this debate about whether or not we had a water management strategy. Well, actually, you could go as far as to say we have 2, to put it in technically correct ways, because there is a plan that was notified in 2005, and the fact that it hasn't yet been endorsed under all the RMA procedures actually doesn't make any difference to the actual way that water is managed in Canterbury. And if the Minister had bothered getting any advice from his officials on that particular point, rather than trying to find an excuse for his ideological push on this particular issue, then he would have known that. But we also have the particular strategy that's alluded to in the title, and that's the Canterbury Water Management Strategy. And a very unusual innovation, and I'd be really interested in hearing from the Minister at some stage of the debate about how this bill was designed, because it has quite an unusual layout and structure actually. But in a very unusual move, the Schedule 1 of the 2 schedules on the Act is actually the vision and principle of Canterbury Water Management Strategy Strategic Framework in its entirety. It's from page 31 right through to page 35 is just the Canterbury Water Management Strategy. So here in the legislation we have the principles of the Water Management Strategy outlined. The Minister saying we don't have a water management strategy, that's so terrible, I have to sack all the democratically elected regional councillors and appoint 7 commissioners. And the Minister then went on to say they'd be paid $2,000 a day. I'd be really interested to know what Minister Hyde thinks of the value of commissioners who are replacing elected regional councillors getting paid $2,000 a day, and they are only going to perform the statutory functions of the Canterbury Regional Council. There will be no connection with the city, no connection with the community. They'll do a minimum amount of work that's possible, and they'll get $2,000 a day compared with the $50,000 a year that the elected councillors currently get. And the worst part of all of that, not only did the Minister say he was sacking our councillors, he was appointing commissioners to do the job, he was putting in place a whole lot of avoidance of natural scrutiny and public input. He's doing it all under urgency with no select committee process, no scrutiny at select committee or right for the public to have their say. And at the end of it, the Minister says that on top of all that, the ratepayers of Canterbury are going to pay the bill. So we get to pay the $2,000 a day consultancy fee for Dame Margaret Baisley et al., when we didn't even ask for them. We asked for our elected representatives to be maintained in those positions. We said there were many options for extension of the work. We